Something that has struck most readers of Jerome's letters is that they are often do not seem very much like letters at all, but at times appear rather to be what has been called syndramata carene ephonta by Hieronymus, or treatise with a dear Mr. So-and-so at the top. To quote, some of these letters exceed the length of the average Liber of Caesar's commentaries and have fewer second-person forms to boot. As someone with an admittedly passing acquaintance with the Church Father, I felt fascinated by his use and abuse of the epistolary framework. One must be careful to avoid the word genre, and wanted to obtain a better understanding of it. In this paper, I'm going to take as my point of departure 3 well-known letters by Jerome: Epistle 45 to Asilla, an apology for his life in Rome; Epistle 14 to Heliodorus, an exhortation to asceticism; and Epistle 29 to Marcella, an exercise in exegesis with and all the while I will be drawing attention to the devices employed by Jerome to reinforce the appearance of epistolarity. These three letters each represent a different genre: the exegetical, the protractic, and the apology, some of which are more conventional than others. I am under no illusion that calling attention to a discrepancy between epistolary conventions and Jerome's practices is anything new. There has been a tendency in Jerome's scholarship to emphasize certain easily identifiable formal characteristics of the classical letter, such as brevity and straightforward prose, also emphasized by Demetrius, and then inquire when, to what effect, and to what end he violated these precepts. But this is to assign too much weight to the authority of a handful of rhetoricians who have condescended to describe a type of prose not usually afforded canonical status. Their strictures, which incidentally have been cited as precursors to the modern standards of business communication, showing just how restricted they actually are, amount to anything but a satisfactory picture of the vast variety of ancient letters. At best, they show a standard model, the form letter, from which any self-respecting author will deviate when the situation calls for it. Hence this lovely quote by Erasmus: "No one would be so insane as to prescribe only one form for a letter. That would be like prescribing one size of shoe for everyone." While Jerome is an extreme case, he is by no means unique. It would also be a suggestio falsi to imply that letters do not share certain common characteristics that allow us to recognize them as such. Just as the 7th century Spanish writing boot has relatively little in common with the Athenian sandal, they both share the same purpose, and in the same sense, Symmachus and Jerome both wrote letters, although they do not look much like one another. The letter has an addressee, to whom it is styled, and with whom the sender at least notionally wishes to communicate personally and intimately. This communicative situation may be fictitious, but it is at the core of epistolarity as I understand it, and from this everything else arises: the conversational tone, the relative brevity, the topoi of belonging and absence, the principles of accommodatio, also customization. Those traits are, I would argue, as with 4 legs of a horse, typical but not defining. It is an old observation, dating back to Hermann Peter at least, that this framework of perceived intimacy and privacy makes for an ideal device for pamphleteering, allowing greater outspokenness and less rigor, without breaking the standards of decorum. No one would expect strict and ordered argumentation in a casual conversation. If anything, it would break the illusion. And any slips into unbecoming honesty merely reinforces the private atmosphere. As we can see here, when you are arguing passionately, order is nowhere to be found, amor ordinem nescit. It is also astonishing how little we tend to doubt sincerity of those on whom we eavesdrop. especially if what we overhear is confidential and betrays a certain carelessness or lack of polish. Jerome is well aware of this. He often draws attention to inelegancies and awkwardly structured sequences, even where they are not readily apparent to a reader. It would be tiresome to call attention to all these places, so we'll let Epistle 108 suffice, which has this lovely little remark at the tail end of it, alleging that it was dictated, that it means that he hadn't even corrected it himself, over the course of 2 sessions and then just sent as it was. It came from the heart, so to speak. Now, it has been claimed that such remarks are what in the modern parlance would be termed humble bragging, showing off with how great facility such things came to him, but surely that's not all there is to it. Drawing attention to the circumstances under which a letter was composed was one of Jerome's favorite devices. References to his emotional state are ubiquitous, as are the concomitant emotional outbursts laden with rhetorical questions and snappy sentences. We will also often refer to the time constraints imposed by the epistolary situation. The messenger might be growing impatient, or Jerome himself may be writing from the road, unable to avail himself of all the means of production. One striking instance of this occurs in Epistle 45 to a seller. Jerome wrote this letter in the wake of his expulsion from Rome, ostensibly in an effort to justify himself. To a seller, the most ascetic among his circle of Roman women, and had received well chosen. Jerome opens this letter with a traditional topos from thank you notes, thank you letters. No matter how much gratitude he shows her, it will never suffice to repay her. A perfectly normal, not to say cliched introduction, instilling certain expectations and putting the reader at ease. He then gives it a hefty shot of humilitas, further reinforcing the conventionality of the whole enterprise, although the appearance of his critics in this sentence does show the storm clouds rising on his horizons. This he then uses as a jumping off point for a sudden and violent invective against his accusers, giving us a completely different letter than the one we would have expected from the opening line alone. Jerome loses himself so fully in his indignation that when he starts using the second person again, it is aimed at a fictive accuser among the general audience rather than the addressee. Shortly afterwards, he breaks off, saying that he is writing this through his fears as he is boarding his ship in the harbor. The transition is practically non-existent. That the structure is loose, almost stream of conscience, that this is an effusion of emotion, is not a design flaw, it's a feature, what one would expect of an angry man saying quid in bucam venerit. A full defense, providing answers to each of the charges leveled against him, as some would expect, would only undermine the fiction, a fiction which Jerome reinforces for good measure at the end by asking a seller to pass on his regards to his other female patrons, hereby staking a claim to them. My dearest friends, not anyone else's. This ending elegantly shows the possibilities for signaling to a wider audience inherent in epistolographical conventions. Moving on to the next letter. Although I do really love that picture. Epistle 14 to Hieronymus is an exhortation to the ascetic life, an early work written by Jerome when he was only about 30. The message is, however, typical and quite severe. Come to the desert and give your father a good kicking on the way out. There is Christ with the banner, and if necessary, do drop all other family values. Jerome would later write a similar protracted to Hieronymus' nephew, Nephocian, in which he retracted but only a bit, describing the earlier work as a product of ebullient youth, still steeped in the rhetoric of the schoolboy. Nonetheless, we know this letter circulated publicly early on and in isolation, as Jerome's inclusion of it among his lists of work in De Viris Illustribus and his repeated mention of it as a work presumed known to his audience attests. He even tells us that Fabiola knew it by heart. If true, it had attained a fairly wide circulation within the 5 years since it was penned, and fulfilled its function as a pamphlet admirably. So how does Jerome reinforce the illusion of epistolarity? Firstly, by directing our attention to the physicality of the letter. Jerome often employs this image of the tear-stained letter, and it has the dual advantage of showing how emotionally moved he is at the moment in writing, and anchoring the exchange in the real world. There is one letter, one original, which has water as well as ink on it. He also plays extensively with an established prehistory with the addressee, sketched in enough detail that the situation is clear to a general reader, but kept vague enough to seem private. By this means, the letter is placed within a long-standing relationship. After some words encouraging Heliodorus to join him in the desert, Jerome interrupts himself with a rhetorical question and adopts a harsher tone, upbraiding him for leaving Jerome to see the life of an ascetic on his own, and thus trying to shame Heliodorus into forsaking his position of life of relative comfort as a bishop. From here follows a mock dialogue, in which the various possible objections are shot down. A letter was famously defined as one half of a conversation, but an even better ratio can be achieved if you presume to speak for the other interlocutor. At every turn, Jerome adds some color to Heliodorus, referring to his nephew and to his episcopate. Here, Jerome grabs the opportunity to take a jab at those priests whose formal and institutional authority is not matched by their lives, almost, if not quite, implying that a self-indulgent priest has no powers. These circumstances are, however, never so unique that any Roman patrician would not easily be able to translate them to their own lives. At the end of the protractic, it has become almost divorced from its framing and culminates in a vision of Judgment Day heavily reminiscent of the Spectaculis. Yes, here are the various family members. One epistolary quality that is particularly notable in Jerome's correspondence is customization, what is technically termed accommodatio. His tone, style, and subject matter are all adapted to the situation and to the correspondent in such a way that we get a fairly clear picture of his correspondence, their tastes and inclinations. When contrasted with, say, Pliny, Sidonius, or even Augustine to some extent, Jerome shows a much greater flexibility, conferring upon his correspondence an unmatched sense of identity, the only one of Pliny's correspondents who has any real identity beyond trade in this Varro, I'd say. One of the principal beneficiaries of this is Marcella, who is portrayed as by far the most intellectually curious of the lot. If there is a letter dealing with some relatively obscure point of the original Hebrew, one can be fairly certain to find her name at the head of the letter. This allows Jerome to heavily emphasize another element of genuine epistolarity, namely reciprocity. There is always a trigger in the background, either a letter or conversation, and Jerome draws on this for his framing devices. We have here the good Marcella tormenting Jerome for some answers, and he prefers looking at a skull. Epistle 29 begins with a short meta-epistolary remark characterizing the letter as a conversation between those absent. And just as with any other conversation, it may be seasoned with learning, but it should ideally not consist of it. Marcella, however, does nothing but incessantly demand knowledge from Jerome, who has to comply. From this first epistolary commonplace, Jerome then shifts directly to the next, mentioning his rough style, excused by the impatient letter carrier. Excused by the impatient letter carrier standing outside his door. Jerome then goes on to answer a question posed by Marcella, starting with the first one in her letter, thus again citing the triggering incident. The question pertained to the Hebrew words left untranslated by Jerome, of which he only gets around to explain two of them, Borut and Teraphim. He is here making the case that translating these words would result in an unacceptable flattening, by no means an uncontroversial position. During this rather arid discussion, Jerome twice makes reference to a possibility that he might be interrupted at any moment, then says that the remaining priestly garments must be discussed viva voce at some point, other time, and ends it with an excuse for the inadequacy of his language. To this might be added the several words denoting his emotional state while writing, particularly his amusement, which is seldom expressed in his more formal commentaries. Great, almost excessive care has been taken to situate this most unletter-like topic within the framework by heaping topos upon topos. Here the language. We have here seen a series of different strategies that can be employed in order to make the impersonal seem personal. The epistolary framing device remains just that most of the time, limit to the start and the end of the text, although it occasionally makes itself felt throughout. The looser style that it allows is applied sometimes to great effect, on the one hand rendering possible a more relaxed treatment of complex topics, on the other allowing a more pathetic appeal than dignity would otherwise have demanded. We also notice that topics that are less stereotypically epistolary sometimes cause the good Jerome to compensate strongly, drawing so heavily on epistolary commonplaces as to approach the absurd, showing just how important it was to remain within the framework. On the other hand, his approach to protractic apology and consolation, more traditional types, is more free and relaxed, relying on the conventions of the subtype rather than the general species of composition to convey their classification and place in ancient literature in general. Thank you for your attention.